All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the inner workings of an exceptionally rare psychological profile. We're talking about the hidden psychology behind folks who don't just think faster, but think fundamentally deeper. If you've ever felt like your brain is just running on a completely different operating system than everyone else around you, well, stick around, because what we're looking at today is going to be incredibly revealing.
So have you ever met someone, or hey, maybe this is actually you, who just feels fundamentally different? And I definitely don't mean loud or eccentric. I mean someone who just refuses to fit into trends, totally ignores societal approval, and honestly feels pretty out of place almost everywhere they go. It's this universal yet incredibly isolating feeling. It isn't about being better or worse than anyone else, it's just about operating on a completely separate cognitive wavelength. And as the source material we're digging into today points out, this isn't just some quirky personality trait, it is actually backed by some serious, deep psychology.
To put that into perspective for a second, roughly 2% of the population actually thinks like this. 2%. We're talking about a tiny, tiny fraction of people whose brains are literally wired for this relentless, extraordinary depth. These are highly gifted individuals. And to be clear, we're not just talking about getting a high score on the standard IQ test here. No. We're looking at a holistic psychological profile where the brain and the emotions are intertwined on a completely elevated level.
And that brings us to the outsider phenomenon. Look, if you constantly feel like an outsider, it's not some flaw in your social skills, it's actually a symptom of a mind that just flat out refuses to play a role. Because this rare personality type is wired for absolute authenticity, rather than just adapting to fit in. They would literally rather sit alone in a room than put on a fake mask. They crave depth, meaningful connections. So everyday surface-level stuff, like, small talk about the weather or what you grabbed for lunch, it doesn't just feel boring, it genuinely feels like a psychological root canal. It's profoundly physically draining for them.
So, what's going on under the hood? Well, the literal architecture of this rare mind is what psychologists call complex cognitive processing. While a lot of people tend to see the world in straight, simple lines, black or white, cause and effect, this rare mind sees the world in rich, multidimensional layers. It's processing patterns, spotting contradictions, mapping complex systems, all at the exact same time. For a brain wired this way, a single thought doesn't just neatly lead to the next logical step. It instantly branches out into 10 different, totally interconnected thoughts.
But here's the catch with all that processing power. It comes with a pretty heavy cost. The mind never, ever stops. This type of personality doesn't just casually live life. They are simultaneously analyzing it as it happens. There is this relentless inner dialogue just constantly reflecting, questioning, and rethinking literally everything. And because they can clearly see the ultimate potential in practically any situation, they end up battling these impossible standards of perfectionism. They're basically their own worst critics. It's an amazing engine for generating wisdom, sure, but let's be real, having a brain that is always running, always planning, it is undeniably exhausting.
However, that exact same mental engine actually gives them a rather unique superpower: cognitive control under stress. Think about it. While everyone else is panicking during a crisis, this rare mind naturally detaches. They can step back and just logically observe the situation, right when emotional reactivity is hitting its absolute peak for everyone else. They somehow find calm in the chaos, and they do it by acting with calculated intention, completely bypassing those impulsive, knee-jerk emotional reactions.
Now, to really wrap our heads around this, it helps to look at the exact opposite end of the spectrum. By examining what psychology calls cognitive rigidity, the profound flexibility of the rare mind is thrown into incredibly sharp relief. On one hand, you have the complex processor, effortlessly juggling nuance, subtle layers, multiple perspectives. And on the other hand, you have cognitive rigidity. This is classic black and white thinking. It's a fundamental struggle to handle any sort of complexity. For a highly rigid mind, an idea has to be 100% right or 100% wrong. There's no in-between, which obviously makes navigating the gray areas of real life super difficult.
And this sets up a really fascinating behavioral contrast. The rare mind is fueled by this endless curiosity. They are constantly asking why, because they just cannot tolerate shallow, surface-level explanations. Plus, they are acutely aware of how much they don't know. Contrast that with the Dunning-Kruger effect. You've probably heard of this. It's that well-documented psychological phenomenon where people with lower cognitive flexibility wildly overestimate their own skills. They'll speak with absolute unwavering confidence, but if you poke just a tiny bit beneath the surface, there's zero underlying logic. To a rigid mind, learning a new idea actually feels like a threat to their ego. But to the rare mind, it's literally the air they breathe.
This massive contrast spills right over into emotional control, too. A cognitively rigid mind will very often confuse a simple disagreement with downright personal disrespect. Why is that? Well, holding two opposing ideas in your head, taking a pause and actually analyzing them, that requires reasoning, and that takes a huge amount of cognitive effort that they simply can't handle. So what do? They bypass logic entirely and go straight to taking offense, which leads to highly impulsive, reactive behavior. The rare mind, though, uses its processing power to regulate those emotions. They naturally hit pause and respond to opposing views with pure logic instead of just popping off.
Finally, on this front, let's talk about accountability. In psychology, there's a term called external locus of control. It basically describes the mindset that life is just something that happens to you. It's the habit of constantly pointing the finger at bad luck or society or other people whenever you have a problem. Lower cognitive flexibility literally blinds these folks to their own flaws. Meanwhile, the rare personality lives in a state of deep internal reflection. They consistently analyze their own actions, their intentions, their growth. They're constantly looking inward to take responsibility. Honestly, sometimes almost to a fault.
Okay, let's shift our focus back entirely to the internal world of this rare mind, specifically looking at the emotional weight of this profile. Because gifted minds almost always come with gifted emotions. It's called high emotional attunement. These individuals experience intensely powerful emotions: happiness, sadness, anger. They feel it all so much stronger than the average person. But here is the fascinating twist. They rarely broadcast it. They process these massive, crashing emotional waves quietly, strictly on the inside. So to the outside world, they seem incredibly calm, grounded, maybe even a little mysterious. But internally, their emotional landscape is remarkably vivid, intensely rich, and yeah, sometimes quite lonely.
And that immense emotional depth feeds directly into something called high interpersonal sensitivity. Have you ever walked into a room and just immediately felt the underlying tension? Or known someone was lying to you before they even finished their sentence? The rare mind does this automatically. They instantaneously read micro-behaviors, subtle shifts in tone, tiny hesitations, and most importantly, the words that are left unsaid. And as the research notes, this isn't paranoia, it's pure intuition backed by lightning-fast, highly attuned observation. They spot dishonesty and manipulation miles away. And trust me, once they see through the mask, it is absolutely impossible for them to unsee it.
So you might be wondering, what exactly drives a mind wired like this? What's the ultimate motivation? Psychologists identify this drive as self-transcendence. While it seems like most of the world is busy endlessly chasing comfort or social status or constant validation from their peers, the rare mind is naturally repelled by that kind of superficial living. Instead, they are driven by this relentless, lifelong pursuit to understand life way beyond material goals. At their core, they are fundamentally searching for authentic truth and a deep, resonant sense of purpose.
Which brings us to a really profound realization from the source material. You want purpose, not applause. You trace truth over validation. I mean, if you've recognized yourself at all in this explainer today, just take a second to really absorb that. Your internal compass, the one that prioritizes deep, lasting meaning over the fleeting, shallow approval of the crowd, it isn't a glitch. It isn't a mistake. It is actually the defining hallmark of a highly evolved cognitive architecture.
So, I want to leave you with this one lingering thought. What does it truly mean to carry the beautiful, exhausting weight of a profoundly gifted mind? Being wired this way, it's an extraordinary gift, right? It lets you see the world with a clarity and a depth that most people will frankly never experience. But as we've explored today, it's also a pretty heavy burden to bear in a world that often just prioritizes the surface level. It requires you to actively protect your energy, to honor your need for absolute authenticity, and to fully embrace the fact that thinking differently is exactly what makes you so rare. Take that thought with you today, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.